Si tú estás aprendiendo inglés, quieres viajar algún día a Estados Unidos o simplemente te da curiosidad la cultura de Gringolandia, este video te va a sonar muy familiar o puede sorprenderte bastante. Esto porque te voy a compartir 7 choques culturales que han vivido varios estudiantes míos en Estados Unidos. Y lo curioso es que muchos de ellos literalmente pensaban que ya sabían cómo funcionaba todo hasta que llegaron. Entonces, dependiendo de los choques culturales que escuches y de cómo los vivas tú, puede que al final incluso te haga reconsiderar ese viaje. No lo sé, pero dime tú después de escucharlos en los comentarios. Y mira, si a ti no te importa y solo quieres practicar tu listening en inglés, perfecto, no te vayas porque la mayor parte de este video lo voy a hacer en inglés, pero con subtítulos en español para que puedas seguirlo sin problemita y al mismo tiempo practicar tu listening mientras aprendes, ¿ok? Quédate hasta el final, por favor, porque el último punto, la verdad, suele ser el más frustrante de todos y casi nadie se da cuenta de él hasta que ya está ahí. Entonces, let's get started. Number 1, the imperial system. Okay, the imperial system. I'm talking about feet, miles, Fahrenheit, and pounds, okay, instead of centimeters or kilograms y todo eso. If you're used to the metric system, the imperial system can feel pretty confusing pretty much right away. Now, the supposed reason that the US still uses the imperial system is that switching everything, for example, road signs, education, engineering, construction, and all of that, would basically be incredibly expensive and complicated. So instead of changing it, the country just kept it. And what's interesting is that this particular culture shock works in reverse as well. For example, when I first started going to gyms, right, el gimnasio, in Europe and in Latin America, I had no idea how much weight I was lifting. Everything was in kilos, and I had to do mental math between my sets or before my sets in order to understand the equivalent weight. Eventually, I got used to it, and that's when everything sort of clicked a little bit more. I realized how much of a shock this must be for people coming to the US, whether they're renting a car, going to the gym, or simply trying to measure literally anything, a table, a desk, anything. Please tell me in the comments si has experimentado the imperial system before. But shock number 2, the non-stop work and grind culture. Sometimes we call it hustle culture. And this is closely connected to something that we call keeping up with the Joneses. Es una frase, es un dicho, keeping up with the Joneses. And basically, keeping up with the Joneses means constantly comparing yourself to the people around you, their job, their income, their car, their house, and feeling pressure to work harder just to keep up with those people who have those things that society idolizes. The problem with this, in my opinion, and this is what many students have told me, is that it's like running on a treadmill, but the problem is that that treadmill never stops. You're moving constantly, but the finish line, the goal post, continues to move as well. The only place where I've personally experienced this even more intensely than in the US was in China. I used to work for TikTok in international business, and I would travel to China regularly, multiple times per quarter for work. And I saw firsthand from my own experience that many people worked 6 days a week for long, long hours. And after work, many of those coworkers would get together in groups and go out for dinner after working like 12 hours a day. So they would get home late, they would then wake up the next day and repeat the cycle again. And I spoke with coworkers there, and they explained to me that the mentality of the traditional business person in China, at least back then, maybe not now, was that the harder you work and the more successful you are in business, the better parent you are. Meaning you're a better father if you work harder and you work a ton of hours and you make a lot of money. Or vice versa, you're a better mother if you do those things. Personally, I see it a bit differently. I believe that quality time, physical presence, and what you do for and with your family matters more. That said, this is still an area where the US has room to improve, in my opinion. So I agree with my students, and I believe it's a real culture shock for many people. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it would be great to know in the comments. Number 3, big sizes, big stores, and constant ordering of products. Everything, I mean everything, seems to be bigger in the US a lot of times. Okay, the people sometimes, food portions, cars can sometimes be bigger. You'll literally go there and say, wow, the exact same Nissan is like bigger than the exact same model Nissan in my country. That happens sometimes. The other thing is you'll see stores like Costco, Walmart, and Best Buy that sell electronics, clothing, other items for the house, but they're pretty much everywhere. In English, we call them big box stores. And another thing that surprises a lot of people is what they see inside of apartment buildings. They see big piles of boxes everywhere, like en la entrada, in the entrance, mostly from Amazon. Why? Because a lot of people order almost everything online instead of shopping at local businesses, right? Instead of going out and supporting your neighborhood business, people tend to go and just buy things online quickly, and it's much less of a human interaction. It's more transactional online. And obviously, I'm not talking about everybody, but it is common and it happens enough that it allows big box stores and e-commerce companies to keep expanding and reinforcing this cycle. And this leads perfectly into the next culture shock, because this one truly surprises people. My students have told me that our return policies in the US are really good, and this is a shock for them. Meaning that for this fourth culture shock, people say that when you go to a store and you purchase something in the US and you participate in that consumerism, you're often shocked how the return process works in the US. In some cases, you can open a product, you can use it, you can keep it for a while, maybe even 30 days, and as long as it's within the return window, you can still return it and get all of your money back. Sometimes it doesn't even matter what condition the product's in. And actually, with Amazon, you can often return items multiple times, and instead of shipping them back to Amazon directly, you can just walk into a grocery store like Whole Foods or a common clothing and department store, Kohl's, and simply drop the item into an Amazon return locker. That's how common ordering on Amazon is and how widely available that opportunity is. So for many people traveling there, especially from Spanish-speaking countries, this feels completely new, sometimes unreal, and it's shocking, especially compared to countries where you can only get store credit or where the store employees force you to exchange the item you're returning for another item within the store, instead of just giving you back your money. So this culture shock, my students have told me, is actually one that they like. Number 5, city size and urban development. Here I'm talking about skyscrapers, highways, and just the sheer size of cities. For example, one student from Central America told me that her first trip to the US was to Miami, and that it was shocking. She mentioned that a lot of people speak Spanish in Miami. Of course, I've also lived there, and I can tell you that yes, they do. But in general, it was her first time seeing an American city, and she said, wow, so many buildings, but also it's so clean. She expected that a city as large as Miami or even New York, where she went next, would just have tons of filth and grime everywhere, which by the way, it actually does if you go to the right areas to see that, or I guess the wrong areas, I don't know. But what she described was basically being in a bubble, como una burbuja, of incredible neighborhoods. And she just said the streets, the sidewalks, everything was clean and tranquil. And I explained that can be the case in any country, any city. But again, this was her experience, and this is what she described. The fact that I'm from the US and can tell you that not all is what it appears to be, I promise you, there are plenty of areas in the US that are not clean and all that, just like any other country anywhere. And she later explained that she actually went to pretty much the nicest areas of Miami, Brickell, Edgewater, Midtown, and later she did the same thing in New York. And she saw that if you venture out of those urban, super populated areas that are really nice, just like any big city, There are areas with super high levels of poverty and visible trash on the streets. But what she saw at first did not match her expectations at all. Another student actually told me they were shocked when they learned that New York City has multiple boroughs. If you haven't heard borough before, a borough is almost like a neighborhood, but in reality, it's almost like a mini city. They're so big that some people can live in one borough in New York their entire adult life and really never end up spending almost any time in any of the other boroughs. When people start to understand how many buildings there are in cities like Miami or New York, and how much effort it truly takes to plan that city, to construct buildings, they often realize how massive and impressive the actual architectural achievement really is. And I would love to know if you have been to the US before, what city you went to, and what you thought of some of the buildings and the architectures. While you do that, let's talk about number 6. And this one is one that I would have to say I agree with a lot, which is the perceived lack of warmth. Okay, not warmth, physical warmth. I'm talking about warmth from the people. That's right. Many people feel that Americans, because we don't have a word for estadounidenses, decimos Americans, sé que suena mal, entiendo por qué y todo eso. Pero dentro de los Estados Unidos, todos dicen Americans. I understand why Americans seem less friendly a little bit at first, because after traveling in Latin America, I completely saw something I never expected. People seem to be way more outwardly social and interactive within Latin America. Not so much in the US. In the US, people may seem more reserved at first, especially when sometimes there might be a language barrier or something like that, or maybe they just don't know you. But once relationships form, I've actually found that many people are pretty warm and fun, actually. It's just not as outwardly visible as it is within the traditional neighborhood in Spanish-speaking America. For example, in Spanish-speaking America, I can go through a different neighborhood, walk down a street, and I can just see people sitting outside in circles, talking, laughing, cooking, dancing, listening to music, not taking everything so seriously, not always focused on just work, but instead human connection. So that does exist in the US, for sure, but it's just not outwardly visible all the time. And there's probably more of that in Spanish-speaking America, based on my experience. And finally, number 7, brand availability and prices. This is another one of those cultural shocks that's actually kind of a positive shock for many of my Spanish-speaking students that are learning English. Why? Well, many times global brands that are expensive in Spanish-speaking countries, for example, Nike shoes, Apple computers, things like that, because they're imported, are often much more affordable in the US because they don't have the import tax. Maybe the company is a US company, and people are often surprised that they can get all the brands they love, the products they've always wanted, without spending a ton of extra money in terms of taxes. Okay? Y ahora tengo varias preguntitas para ti porque me da mucha curiosidad leerte en los comentarios. Mira, ¿has vivido alguno de estos choques culturales tú mismo? Por favor, dímelo en los comentarios. Otra pregunta. ¿Has escuchado hablar de ellos por amigos o familiares? Eso también es importante. O simplemente, ¿qué opinas de Estados Unidos? Incluso si nunca has ido, ¿qué has escuchado? ¿Qué opinas tú? Me interesa mucho entender cómo se percibe el país en la cultura en general. Entonces, no tengas vergüenza, no tengas pena, coméntalo en los comentarios. Y ahora sí, también cuéntame en los comentarios cuánto de mi inglés de verdad lograste entender. Esa parte es clave para que tú mismo veas en qué punto estás con tu listening en inglés. Y hablando de aprender inglés, si este año buscas aprender inglés en serio, considera unirte al canal como miembro VIP. ¿Por qué? Porque en todas mis lecciones incluyo una guía descargable donde repasamos todos los ejemplos del video, donde agrego muchos más ejemplos extra y te ayudo a profundizar mucho más en cada tema. Todo por un precio menor a lo que te cuesta un solo latte o cappuccino americano al mes del Starbucks. Literalmente, si te compras un solo latte del Starbucks, vale más de nuestra membresía si eres miembro VIP. Además de eso, tengo otro videito aquí en YouTube donde explico todo mi método paso a paso. Solo tienes que hacer clic aquí en el cuadrito que acaba de aparecer y te va a dirigir directamente a ese otro video donde te explico esa metodología. Muchas gracias por estar aquí y por ver el video hasta el final y nos vemos en el próximo.